Unsolved was finally pried open after 55 years. Investigators didn't find bones or lanterns. Instead, a desk still covered in white dust, a crushed canary cage, and a reel of wire etched with desperate words. "We are still here." The recording inside revealed Jacek Nowak, Harlan Boone, and Mateo Rizal weren't killed instantly, as the company claimed. They had survived, writing the hours, leaving proof they were locked in from the outside. And what investigators uncovered next would shake the entire town of Kestrel Ridge to its core. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. Want to help us decide the next story? Vote below and subscribe so you don't miss it. Now let's begin. The mine door had been waiting for 55 winters, a slab of rusted steel wedged into stone, its bolts swollen like knuckles from decades of frost. When the first wrench turned, the sound was not sharp but tired, like something old remembering its name. Each bolt moaned as if it didn't want to let go. By the time the last one spun loose, the silence was heavy enough to make us hold our breath. Then it came. Air, rushing slow but steady, sliding out across our boots. It wasn't just cold, it was wrongly cold, sharper than the mountain wind outside. It smelled faintly metallic, like old batteries left too long in a drawer, mixed with damp paper. One of the crew muttered a low, "Damn," and pulled his jacket tighter. I could feel it prickling against my skin, raising goosebumps under my sleeves. When the lamp swept inside, the beam cut through a chamber that had been untouched for half a century. White powder dusted everything like frost. A desk, still standing though warped, leaned into the corner. A canary cage, its wire bent, its little swing broken, was crushed flat against the floorboards, as though someone's boot had stamped it in rage or desperation. And then, the strangest thing of all, a crank-mounted spool of wire. Its tape was blackened, brittle, but scratched into the surface with something sharp were 4 words, crude and uneven. "We are still here." The crew fell silent. The words felt alive, like they weren't carved into the wire decades ago but whispered into the room just moments earlier. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. My hands shook, and I tucked them into my coat pocket so no one would see. I wasn't just here as an observer. My name is Nia Calder, archivist, town daughter, granddaughter of Ewan Calder, the last man to sign the 1955 shift sheet before 9 men dropped into the belly of Kestrel Ridge and never returned. The only reason I was standing here at all was because of a little brass key my mother kept hidden in a tea tin. A key, she said, belonged to my grandfather. A key to a lock we were never meant to touch. When the steel door yawned open and that cold air curled out, I knew instantly this wasn't just history anymore. This was family. And whatever truth had been buried down here was about to breathe again. Kestrel Ridge isn't the kind of place you stumble upon. It's a valley town, half forgotten, its roofs sagging under decades of snow and gossip. The mountain looms above it, a constant shape on the horizon, as if it's leaning down to listen. At its shoulder, carved deep into the rock, lies the Black Vein Mine, a place older than most of the gravestones in town. The mine got its name from the seam itself, a thick black streak of coal that cut across the mountain like a scar. Men used to say you could smell it before you even touched a pick. Sharp, dusty, with a sweetness that clung to the back of your throat. Whole families built their lives around it. Fathers, brothers, uncles, every household had someone working in those shafts. In 1955, 9 of those men walked into Black Vein and simply vanished. No bodies, no funerals, just empty houses and unpaid debts. Some called it an accident, others whispered of a cover-up. Whatever it was, it cracked the heart of this town wide open. Old folks here still lower their voices when they mention the mine, like if you speak its name too loud, you'll wake something. I grew up catching fragments of those whispers, at the diner over burnt coffee, or in the churchyard where the widows gathered. It wasn't gas, one would mutter. No collapse, another would insist. And every time, someone nearby would hush them. To outsiders, the Black Vein was just another exhausted hole in the ground. But for Kestrel Ridge, it was a wound that never healed. You can paint a house, pave a road, even tear down the old company office, but you can't plaster over silence. And silence was all that remained after those men disappeared beneath the rock. And now, standing with that cold air still clinging to my sleeves, I realized this wasn't just about the mine anymore. It was about the town itself, about secrets carried for half a century, heavy enough to warp the backs of everyone who stayed. The night of October 12, 1955, was bitter. The kind of cold that sticks to your breath and makes the lamps burn low. 9 men gathered at the shaft mouth, their carbide lamps bobbing like tiny suns in the fog. Each one signed his name into the shift sheet, ink smudged with coal dust, tired hands pressing harder than they meant to. The roll call was routine, but the details live on in memory, passed like folklore. Jacek Nowak, the Polish immigrant with a laugh too loud for the tunnels, joked about the soup his wife had made. "Thicker than the mud in Angel's Ladder," he said, slapping his stomach. The others chuckled, grateful for a moment of warmth. Harlan Boone, broad-shouldered and stubborn, cursed under his breath about his missing lamp. "If I catch the bastard who borrowed it," he muttered, shaking his head. Then there was Mateo Rizal, who always hummed hymns off-key when he was nervous. That night, he hummed as they stepped into the cage. At 10:47 p.m., the radio sputtered. It wasn't unusual. The old sets crackled all the time, but the foreman frowned when the voices thinned. The men were still checking in, voices clipped, a little tense. Then came a pause, a silence so sharp the static sounded like thunder. The foreman wrote a line in his ledger, "Seal Angel's Ladder pending safety." It didn't make sense. Angel's Ladder was one of the oldest passages, timbered strong, rarely flagged. No one argued, at least not out loud. But the men underground must have noticed. In the dark, every decision echoes. Some witnesses swore they saw lantern light flicker near the shaft hours later. Others swore they heard faint knocking, rhythmic, like men sending signals through stone. But when they told the company men, they were waved off. Gas, they were told. Nothing survives a blow like that. Still, the detail that sticks is small. The last word carried over the static, half swallowed but clear enough to freeze the blood of the foreman who heard it. A voice, maybe Jacek's, maybe Boone's, low and certain. "Don't shut the door." The line went dead after that. The mountain swallowed the sound, and 9 men slipped into silence, leaving behind only an entry in a ledger and families that never slept through a night again. When the alarm rang through Kestrel Ridge, every man who had ever swung a pick came running. Wives wrapped shawls around their shoulders and stood at the ridgeline, breath fogging in the night. Rescue crews gathered fast, helmets strapped, ropes coiled, lamps hissing. But what looked like urgency from the outside felt strangely restrained once they reached the shaft. The company men were already there, clean coats buttoned, clipboards in hand. They spoke in clipped voices, phrases rehearsed like lines from a play. Risk of gas ignition. No secondary ingress. Collapse too unstable. The rescuers swore they could push further. One even shouted, "We hear tapping!" But the maps handed to them didn't match the chalk markings carved in the tunnels. Passages that locals knew by heart were drawn differently, shortened, erased altogether. It was as if the mountain itself had been redrawn overnight. By dawn, the narrative was fixed. Methane pocket, they said. Instant, fatal. Nothing could be done. The men in suits repeated it until the words hardened into fact. And with every hour the sawhorses were pushed further back from the mouth of the shaft. Families, desperate and shivering in the cold, were told to go home. But in town, no one forgot what they'd seen, or what they hadn't. A rescuer, drunk weeks later, told a cousin he'd been ordered to seal off Angel's Ladder before even trying. Another swore he heard voices echoing through the ventilation pipe, faint but steady. Yet every report was silenced, dismissed as grief-talking. The official search ended before it truly began. 9 names turned into 9 rumors, and the mountain, for the first time in living memory, closed its mouth around the truth. Even after the company packed up its sawhorses and declared the mine sealed, Kestrel Ridge didn't stop talking. Whispers drifted through the town like wood smoke, thin, bitter, impossible to contain. You couldn't buy bread at the grocer or get a trim at Dell's barber without catching a piece of it. 3 nights, I swear, Dell himself muttered as scissors snipped over a customer's ear. I heard tapping, same rhythm, steady as a metronome. The customer glanced at the mirror, then lowered his voice. "And you told the company men?" Dell's jaw tightened. "They said grief makes your ears play tricks." His scissors clicked, sharp. But I wasn't grieving. At the churchyard, widows gathered under shawls, breath curling in the air. One claimed she smelled her husband's tobacco on her porch at dawn. His brand was foreign, unmistakable. Another whispered she found his boot print in the mud by the gate, a size too large for any of her boys. The youngest widow, barely 20, was hushed before she could finish her thought. He left me a note under. A firm hand on her shoulder silenced her. Even children passed rumors on the school steps. Some swore the mountain groaned at night, not like rocks settling, but like voices underwater. Others claimed the company trucks came and went long after midnight, headlights off, carrying crates no one dared question. And then there was my grandmother. I remember the way her hands trembled as she folded laundry. White dust ground into her cuffs. She said my grandfather Ewan came home that night, pale as chalk, ledger under his arm. He locked it in the chest at the foot of their bed. Key slipped onto a string around his neck. He wouldn't look me in the eye, she told me once, voice cracking. Like a man carrying words, he wasn't allowed to speak. Behind people's backs, gossip sharpened. That Calder girl's family knows more than they're saying, a woman whispered outside the post office, not realizing I was standing within earshot. Her grandfather had the last word with the company men. Mark me. He signed something he shouldn't have. The truth wasn't in the newspapers, or in the clerk's tidy files. It was in the sideways glances at the diner, in the muttered curses over cheap whiskey, in the shaking hands that folded laundry while dust clung to the cuffs. In Kestrel Ridge, silence was official. But gossip was the only thing that kept the missing men alive. It didn't take long for the company to polish its version of events. By the following week, the newspapers carried identical headlines across the region. Methane blast claims 9, no survivors. Each article read the same, as if copied from a single script. The explanation was simple, neat, and, most importantly, final. A sudden methane pocket had ignited, causing an instantaneous collapse. There had been no chance of survival, no point in dragging out the rescue. The mountain had simply swallowed the men whole. At the courthouse, families were handed envelopes with settlement checks. Amounts calculated not by grief, but by insurance tables. Widows signed papers with trembling hands, told it was the only way forward. Some tore the checks in half right there in the clerk's office. Others pocketed them quietly, guilt and hunger forcing silence. The mine company staged a press photo outside the shaft. Executives in clean suits stood shoulder to shoulder, hats creating a straight horizon line. Their shoes gleamed against the mud where wives had wept only nights earlier. Behind them, the black vein loomed like a shadow with its mouth shut tight. That single story, methane, instant death, was repeated so many times it began to sound like truth. Teachers told it in classrooms. Preachers mentioned it in sermons. Even the children learned to say it without thinking. Gas pocket, collapse, gone. But anyone who had stood near that shaft in the days after knew better. The men had lingered. The mountain had whispered. And the story chosen for the town wasn't written to honor the dead. It was written to bury them twice. After the last newspaper clipping was folded into scrapbooks, Kestrel Ridge slipped into what folks called the long blank. Years where nothing was said out loud, yet the weight of absence was everywhere. The mine gates were chained shut, the company offices shuttered, and in homes across town, 9 chairs stayed empty at dinner tables, 9 coats hung untouched on pegs by the door. At first, people believed something would break, that records would surface, or that another shaft would be opened. But instead, little by little, the evidence thinned. Boxes in the county archive, maps, ledgers, transcripts, were marked misfiled. When clerks were asked, they shrugged, said the papers must have been sent upstate. A young geologist named Rutherford, who had argued the collapse theory didn't add up, was abruptly transferred to another district. His files vanished with him. Meanwhile, life stumbled forward. New factories opened, kids grew up, highways pushed past the town. The mine was spoken of less each year, until it became a shadow, something you gestured at, never quite named. But grief has a way of bleeding through the cracks. Widows gathered in the church hall on anniversaries, candles trembling in their hands. Their children grew into adults who carried the silence differently. Some turned bitter, others restless, some drank themselves numb. At the diner, you'd still catch the occasional glance over a shoulder, as if someone had spoken the unspeakable. Then voices dropped back into murmurs. I came across those gaps as a child in the town archive. File drawers that should have been heavy with paper opened too easily. Card catalogs listed documents that simply weren't there. My mother once told me, "Don't dig too deep, Nia. Some truths aren't for us to carry." But the warning itself felt like proof that something was still waiting under the silence. By the time I was old enough to take the archivist job, the long blank had hardened into habit. The mine became a story people avoided not because they forgot, but because remembering demanded too much. And yet, behind locked drawers and dusty ledgers, I began to notice patterns. Notes missing only from one year, maps redrawn but never signed. It was as if someone had trimmed the town's memory with scissors, cutting away the pieces that pointed too close to Angel's Ladder. Kestrel Ridge kept breathing, kept moving, but the wound never closed. It just sat there under the skin of the mountain, waiting for someone stubborn enough, or foolish enough, to dig again. It began with something small, a brass key tucked inside a battered tea tin. My mother kept it on the top shelf of her wardrobe, wrapped in a piece of handkerchief cloth. For years I thought it was just an old keepsake, like the pressed flowers and faded postcards she stored alongside it. But when she grew ill, she called me over, her hand trembling as she pressed the key into my palm. "This," she whispered, "was your grandfather's. He wore it on a string around his neck the night the mine was sealed. Don't lose it." The metal was warm from her skin, heavy for its size, with a small nick like a bite taken out of its edge. It didn't fit any lock I knew in our house, nor the archive where I worked. For weeks I carried it in my pocket, thumbing the grooves until they grew familiar. Something about it itched at me, a puzzle I couldn't set aside. It was only when I met Orrin Pike, a retired surveyor with lungs ruined by dust, that the key began to make sense. He pulled a rolled oilskin map from his desk drawer, yellowed and brittle. "This isn't the official one," he rasped, pointing to a thin line labeled Angel's Ladder. The passage stretched deeper than any of the company records showed. At the very end was a neat square, drawn carefully, marked only with a dot. "Refuge chamber?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Orrin's eyes clouded. He shook his head once, slow. "Or a cupboard for mistakes." That night I turned the key over in my hands again and again. The weight of it was unbearable. It wasn't just a trinket. It was a doorstop, a silent invitation. And deep down, I knew it had been waiting, not just for 55 years, but for me. When we decided to drill, it wasn't an official crew that came. No hard hats with company logos, no reporters snapping photos. Just two men who worked for cash and silence, their pickup loaded with battered equipment that smelled of oil and cigarettes. They didn't ask many questions, only wanted to know how deep and how soon. The rig groaned as it bit into the mountain. Each turn of the drill sent a shiver through the rock, a low growl that made my teeth ache. I stood back, arms folded tight, trying not to show how my hands trembled. Cold air seeped out as the bore widened, as if the mountain itself was exhaling after decades of holding its breath. When the drill punched through, the bit went slack. One of the men cut the engine, and a hush fell over the ridge. From the borehole came a draft, sharp and dry, colder than the outside air. One of the men muttered, "Doesn't smell like gas," and spat into the dirt. We lowered a thumb-sized camera on a cable, its little light cutting into the void. At first, the screen showed only walls coated in pale dust. Then the image steadied on something man-made, a desk, standing crooked but intact, papers fused to its surface like petals pressed flat. The lens shifted again, toward the floor. There, half buried in powder, lay a notebook. Pages torn, edges blackened, yet words visible in cramped pencil. Timestamps, written line by line. Midnight, 12:47, 1:22. Each line followed by two words, scrawled over and over until the pencil broke, locked from out. I felt my throat tighten. My mother's brass key pressed against my chest from my pocket, heavy as lead. Behind me the two drillers whispered. "Why write it down if they were already gone?" one asked. The other shrugged, chewing his lip. Unless they weren't. The camera swung once more, catching the edge of something warped and twisted, the crushed frame of a canary cage, metal bent as if stomped under a boot. I closed my eyes for a moment, and it was like I could hear the faint flutter of wings that never made it out. For the first time since 1955, the mountain wasn't silent anymore. It had begun to speak, one image at a time, and the words it gave us didn't fit the story we'd been told. The deeper we probed, the clearer it became. This wasn't just another drift swallowed by collapse. It was a room, deliberate in its shape, its walls painted with a flaking coat of pale enamel. Someone had built it to keep men alive, not bury them. The camera swept over shelves that still held the ghosts of supplies, cans dented but intact, labels faded into whispers of words, milk, beans, syrup bread. A first aid tin lay open, bandages stiff and yellowed, and in the corner, a hand-crank ventilator sat rusting, its handle frozen mid-turn. Someone had been working it until the very end. This wasn't instant death. This was waiting, surviving, hoping someone would come. The wire spool confirmed it. Once cleaned, its brittle tape revealed the hiss of breath, the scrape of boots, the low rumble of voices. Not screams, not chaos, but men trying to document the hours as they passed. "Write the names," one voice said. Another muttered, "Don't let them say it was gas." I felt my chest tighten. For decades, the town had been told there was nothing to recover. No chance, no survivors. And yet here, in this cramped chamber, was proof they'd lasted. Proof they'd written until the pencil itself gave out. For a moment, there was relief. Finally, we had something solid, something real. The methane story began to unravel, thread by thread. But even as the first truth settled in, a darker question pressed against my ribs. If they survived the blast, if they lasted hours, maybe days, then why had no one opened the door? The moment news of the refuge chamber leaked, the mountain grew crowded again, not with families or volunteers, but with lawyers, clerks, and men in tailored coats. They didn't arrive with drills or shovels. They carried folders, stamped seals, and papers thick with clauses. A letter came first, folded neatly in an envelope with a corporate crest embossed on the flap. Cease and desist. Polite, clean, yet sharp as a knife under the ribs. They called the chamber a legal anomaly. Their words were wrapped in phrases like unauthorized excavation and trespassing on company property. But the message was simple. Stop digging. In town, whispers twisted fast. At the diner, I caught the low voices from a corner booth. "She's stirring trouble." "Yeah, Calder's girl should have left it buried." "Families already made peace." Peace. That word stung. Peace didn't sound like widows sitting in the dark every anniversary. Peace didn't look like children who grew up asking questions no one dared answer. Even Orrin Pike, the old surveyor, warned me in a cracked voice. "They'll turn the law against you. You can't fight their money." He coughed hard, lungs rattling like gravel in a can. "I tried once, Nia. Lost my job, lost my house." Be careful. At the hardware store, I felt eyes follow me as I walked the aisles. Two men whispered near the counter, not quiet enough. "She thinks she's some kind of hero." Hero? More like fool, poking around ghosts no one asked for. And yet, beneath the criticism, I noticed something else. A flicker in people's eyes when I passed. A flicker that looked a lot like fear. Fear of the company's reach, or fear of what might be uncovered. Everywhere I went, I carried the weight of that spool of wire. In my head, I kept replaying that one line. Don't let them say it was gas. The company's counter was clear. They wanted silence restored, the mountain sealed again. But their very desperation betrayed them. If it truly had only been gas, why fight so hard to bury the evidence? The first truth had cracked their story, and their panic only proved there was something deeper, darker, still hiding in the rock. We threaded the brittle tape onto an old reel-to-reel player, its gears whining as if reluctant to move. For a moment there was only static, low, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. Then, faintly, breath, the unmistakable sound of men alive, trapped in a room that the world had declared empty. The first voice was steady, clipped by fatigue. "Put the children's names down," he said, pencil scratching faintly in the background. Another man, voice hoarse, cut in. "Do not write mine." Then silence, broken by the creak of boots on powder. The tape hissed. Timestamps were spoken, 12:13, 1:02, 2:31. A chorus of hours, marked as though someone knew the clock itself was their only witness. Then came the line that froze everyone in the room. They locked from out. The words repeated, softer, weaker, like a prayer turned accusation. Locked from out. The ventilator groaned, hand cranked until its wheeze grew faint. A match struck, flared, then the crackle of paper burning. Somewhere in the distance, someone coughed, a sound too human, too recent to belong to the dead. "Don't let them say it was gas," another voice begged. The reel sputtered, the tape squealed, then fell silent. We sat around the player, unable to move. The room itself seemed to lean closer, as though the walls wanted to hear again. These weren't dying words. They were testimony, men carving their truth into the only medium they had left. The company's tale of a sudden, merciful blast no longer held. The tape proved what gossip had whispered for decades. The miners hadn't died instantly. They'd been sealed in, left to record their own erasure. The words from the tape, locked from out, wouldn't leave my mind. They circled like crows. If the refuge chamber had been sealed deliberately, the question was no longer how the men died, but why. It was Orrin Pike, the retired surveyor, who finally gave shape to the shadows. We sat in his cluttered kitchen, the smell of boiled coffee hanging stale in the air. His hands shook as he unrolled another map, This one, hidden beneath floorboards. His voice rasped like gravel. There was another chamber, he said, not on the official plans. We called it Carrick Vault. The name alone made my stomach turn. Carrick Vault wasn't a refuge, it was storage. Orrin jabbed the map with a finger. His nail yellowed and cracked. They used it to keep drums of solvent stuff brought in for drilling. Should have never been down there. One leak could turn air toxic in minutes. His eyes flicked to mine. That's what happened, Nia. The vault bled. According to him, the order came fast. Sunday, late night. Seal the refuge. Cut off Angel's ladder. Don't let the vapors reach the surface. The men inside were treated like a gasket, meant to hold the problem in place until readings dropped. 3 days. That was the interval they were given. Hold for 3 days, then reopen. Only no one ever came back. The higher-ups lost their nerve, Orrin whispered, his throat catching. They let the clock run out, and by then it was easier to tell the world it was gas, an explosion, whatever fit the headline. I sat there, the brass key heavy in my pocket, a key to a lock that had never been meant to open again. The men hadn't been lost to chance, or even negligence. They'd been sacrificed to protect a company's ledger and reputation. At the diner the next morning, 2 old-timers at the counter spoke just loud enough for me to hear. She's digging too deep. Yeah, some doors ain't meant to be opened. Best to let the past rot. Their voices wavered with fear, not contempt. They knew. Everyone knew, on some level. The methane story was just a blanket tossed over a grave no one wanted to exhume. Now, with Orrin's map and the tape's testimony, the blanket was gone, and the shape beneath was monstrous. It was a week later, on a rain-slick evening, that the last missing piece slid across my kitchen table. The daughter of a long-dead safety inspector arrived unannounced, her coat dripping, her eyes hollow with years of carrying someone else's secret. Without a word, she set down an envelope, yellowed, brittle at the edges. He couldn't die with it, she whispered. Said it wasn't fair to take the truth into the ground. Inside was a confession, written in a trembling hand on onion skin paper. The words bled and shook, but they were unmistakable. I turned the lock. I was told it was to save the town. The men were to be retrieved when the air cleared, but the order never came. We left them in there. Pinned to the letter was a rough sketch of Angel's Ladder, the refuge, and beside it, in stark ink, the hidden Carrick Vault. The handwriting matched the maps Orrin had shown me. Every line was the same. I sat frozen, the brass key warm against my palm. My breath came shallow, almost guilty, as if reading the words aloud would condemn me too. Across the table, the woman stared at her hands. He carried that weight every day, she said softly. Coughed himself to death with it still on his chest. He begged me not to let the town forget. For the first time, it wasn't rumor, or whispers, or faint voices on brittle tape. It was ink on paper, an admission carved by the very man who'd sealed the door. The silence of 55 years broke that night, and with it, the mountain's deepest lie finally had a voice. When we brought the letter, the wire spool, and Orrin's maps to court, the air in Kestrel Ridge shifted. For the first time in half a century, silence cracked wide enough for the truth to seep through. Reporters, lawyers, even old miners with canes crowded the county hall. The families of the 9 men filled the benches, grandchildren sitting shoulder to shoulder with widows who had carried 55 years of unanswered grief. The judge listened as the evidence was laid out piece by piece. The spool played its testimony, the voices naming the hours, the scratching of pencils, the plea not to let the world believe it was gas. The letter shook in its plastic sleeve as the inspector's handwriting was read aloud. I turned the lock. I left them inside. Gasps echoed through the room. A few people wept openly. The company's representatives squirmed in their seats, faces set in stone, but their defense cracked under the weight of those voices. It wasn't negligence anymore. It was choice. Deliberate. And in that choice, 9 men had been sacrificed to protect numbers on a ledger. Outside, the town gathered by the church. Brass plaques were finally etched with the names of the lost: Jacek Nowak, Harlan Boone, Mateo Rizal, and 6 others whose families had waited a lifetime to hear them spoken in the open again. Children placed candles at the base of the memorial, their flames flickering against the mountain's dark silhouette. For once, no one hushed the names. They rolled across the valley like a tide that had been dammed too long. But the reckoning wasn't just about the dead. It was about those who'd been forced to carry silence, who'd grown up under the shadow of a lie. Neighbors embraced neighbors. Strangers clasped hands. Even those who had criticized me, the ones who whispered in the diner that I should have left it alone, came forward, their eyes wet, murmuring apologies. It wasn't justice, not fully. No courtroom could return fathers, brothers, husbands. But the lie was gone, ripped up by its roots. And in its place stood something closer to dignity. For the first time, Kestrel Ridge had its truth back. And with it, the names of 9 men were given back to the mouths of those who had never stopped waiting to speak them. Weeks after the trial, I found myself back inside the refuge chamber. The air was still bitter, sharp as iron on the tongue, but quieter now, as though the mountain had exhaled its last secret. Dust coated my boots with every step. I set the reel-to-reel on the desk, threaded the tape, and let it play one final time. Static rose, then softened into breath. A voice emerged, ragged but steady, the sound of a man speaking to anyone who might listen beyond stone and time. Count the hours right. We were here. We were still. There was a shuffle, the scrape of a boot against powder, the faint chirp of a match being struck, flaring briefly, then snuffed. The ventilator's wheeze hummed like a tired heart. And then silence, long and thick, the kind that feels alive. I closed my eyes, palms pressed flat on the desk, and I could almost see them. 9 men, faces drawn by lamplight, writing names, scratching hours, leaving proof not just of their deaths, but of their refusal to vanish quietly. They had carved their voices into time itself, so one day, someone would find them. When the tape spun out, the chamber returned to its stillness. I sat there, listening to the mountain breathe, and wondered if justice had truly been done, or if it was only a shadow of what they deserved. As I stepped back into the daylight, the question clung to me. Who turned the key that night, sealing the door? Was it one man, trembling under orders, or a chain of hands that all chose silence? And now, I leave it with you. Listen to those words. Feel the weight of that air. Tell me, what do you hear between the taps? The sound of fear, or the rhythm of a lock turned twice from the wrong side? And that's the haunting truth of the miners of Kestrel Ridge, voices sealed in stone, silenced for 55 years. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened behind that locked door? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found yourself drawn into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss another mystery we uncover. Share this video with someone who loves true crime and unsolved secrets. Because the more we talk about these forgotten stories, the harder it becomes for history to erase them again.